Shalom Lekulam. Welcome everyone to the latest in this series of Zoom discussions, conversations, lectures on all different matters pertaining to the Jewish world and the state of Israel from the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the center, and I'm sure we have a number of returnees, people that are regulars to these Wednesday events. But for those of you who are new, I'll just explain briefly that I'm going to have a conversation for about half an hour with our guest speaker, and then the floor is yours. You can write questions in to the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and I will select various questions to put to our speaker. As I said, we cover a number of topics that are relevant for those of you that are following the politics here in Israel and the Middle East, and also the wider Jewish world. I had a number of requests from regulars on this on these sessions to address the rising incidents, or certainly rising awareness of incidents of anti-Semitism in the United States. And it wasn't very difficult for me to choose who to invite to discuss that. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to have with me today, well, not with me literally, of course, but in his home in New York, Abe Foxman, the former national director of the Anti-Defamation League from 1987 to 2015, during which time he established the ADL's reputation as the foremost organization fighting anti-Semitism and bigotry. He's currently the League's National Director Emeritus. He's the author of several books, including Never Again, The Threat of the New Anti-Semitism, The Deadliest Lies, The Israel Lobby, and the Myth of Jewish Control, Jews and Money, the story of a stereotype and viral hate containing its spread on the internet. In March 2016, Abe Foxman became vice chair of the Board of Trustees at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City in order to lead its efforts on anti-Semitism. He's also been awarded several honors from nonprofit groups, religious figures, and statesmen, including, and this is the most important for me, of course, the Begin Prize, awarded by the Begin Heritage Center for his services to diaspora Jewry in his fight against anti-Semitism, the Interfaith Committee of Remembrance Lifetime Achievement Award as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, bigotry, and discrimination, the Raoul Wallenberg Humanitarian Leadership Award, and also the Knight of the Legion of Honor, France's highest civilian honor. I'm sure there's a French title for that, which I would butcher if I attempted to say it in French. Abe Foxman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Great. So Abe, let's start with this. You wrote a book nearly 20 years ago, which I referred to, entitled Never Again, The Threat of the New Anti-Semitism. Are we witnessing, in the United States in particular, a resurgence of this new anti-Semitism, or is it something different? Is it an even newer anti-Semitism?
Well, the book's full title was Never Again, ?
Ah, okay. I should have said Never Again.
Never Again, ?
Right.
Which basically I then said, just in its title, it can happen, and God forbid will happen. It depends at what level. So, no, in the 50 years at the ADL, the one thing I learned is to understand that anti-Semitism is a yesh, it's a presence. And until and unless we develop an antidote or a vaccine, it will be with us. The question is how virulent it will be. And so it's there. It's always been there. Sadly, or not sadly, Jews didn't take it seriously all the time. In the 50 years at the ADL, we issued annual reports of attitudes, of events, of incidents. The FBI issued reports every year in the United States of anti-Semitic incidents. And throughout the years, not just in the last 2 or 3 years, but throughout the years, the numbers were very significant. Acts against Jews were the #1 act against any religion in the United States. So it's always been a serious concern. The question is, at what point would it surface? At what point would it be virulent? It is true that in the last several years, for the first time, we witnessed in the United States Jews being killed because they are Jews. Since Leo Frank in 1913, when he was lynched in Atlanta, Georgia, he was lynched because he was a Jew. He was also a white Jew. So that was the last act of violent anti-Semitism where a Jew lost his life because he was a Jew. So when we woke up several years ago to Pittsburgh, to Poway, to Jersey City, that certainly shook up the American Jewish community, but I would say the world as well. The media never covered anti-Semitism as a serious issue or threat. And again, I say to you, we knew it was there. We knew it was serious. We knew that we did not have an antidote, that the only thing available was education. So we always said, take security seriously, not after attacks, but all the time. So from this perspective, those of us and those of you who follow closely the nature of bigotry in America, the nature of anti-Semitism, what's happening now should be shocking, but not surprising.
Right, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that anti-Semitism wasn't taken seriously, because one of the things that seems to be happening, looking at it from the outside at least, is that there's this focus in America, that when people talk about racism in the United States, they're thinking of skin color, they're thinking of African Americans, and I guess Hispanics as well. And there's obvious historical reasons for that, with the legacy of slavery and everything. But there is this issue that it seems that the far right don't regard Jews as white, right? Or they have this crazy conspiracy that the Jews are trying to replace white Americans with blacks, which is the whole Jews will not replace us chant that they were doing in Charlottesville. And meanwhile, on the far left, you have progressives who seem to regard Jews as almost as the ultimate white people who are super privileged and successful, but are still claiming this victim status. How do you think that is that a real problem, that there's still today that there is this lack of understanding of anti-Semitism as not just a serious racism, but actually one of the most prolific forms of racism?
Well, throughout my years at the ADL, I was always asked, what's the reason? And I guess if we could find and identify the one reason, if there was one reason that caused anti-Semitism, then maybe we could find that antidote. The truth is that anti-Semitism has served many masters, many interests, and throughout time, periods, geography, it has metastasized to serve whatever interests were needed. We are the mother of all hatreds. We have survived, anti-Semitism has survived communism, fascism, Nazism, any ism that you want. A long time ago, over 100 years ago, Mark Twain, the great American novelist, got himself into financial trouble and went on a speaking tour in Europe to try to make up for his financial debt. And he returned to write an essay about anti-Semitism called Concerning the Jews. And what was fascinating is that he wrote that wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. I didn't go out to look for it. He said, rich people, poor people, smart people, stupid people, religious people, atheists. Wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. He tried to figure out the reason why. He said that people are jealous of Jewish success, and even wrote about Herzl, saying, can you imagine if all the smart Jews came to one place in one country, what would be to the world? But so it's, Paul, To the right, we're, they're a physical danger to us. To the left, they begin with an ideological. They want to destroy our identity, our being, our nationalism, etc. At the end of the day, it comes to the same thing. It's hatred of the Jews. It's isolating the Jews. It's trying to undo that which we have achieved. And I would say, on the good side or the bad side, is anti-Semitism has been politicized, much more so in the last couple of years than before. And we become a political football. Republicans blame Democrats, Democrats blame Republicans. It doesn't help us. And we need to be very careful not to play that game and not to permit them to make us that football, because it doesn't help us. It helps them and it hurts us. But ironically, it's this politicization of anti-Semitism that has put us in the media. So now it's written about a lot more than it's ever been written about. And the one thing we haven't mentioned is there is a significant vehicle that changes all of it. And that's the internet, and that's social media. And if you were to say to me, what is the one thing that has catapulted anti-Semitism from brown paper bags to meetings at bars or secret cabals about Jews and conspiracies, it's the internet, which has taken anti-Semitism, and given it the legitimacy of making it public. I was asked, Paul, many years ago when ADL celebrated or commemorated 100 years of its being, if you had to mention one thing that the ADL did that had an impact on hate and anti-Semitism, what would it be? There are a lot of things, but the one thing that I came up with is that before I came into the ADL came up with a legislation called the Anti-Mask Law. In the United States Constitution, our laws permit you to be a bigot. Well, that's part of freedom of speech. But you have to take responsibility for your bigotry. We passed a law in the United States which said to the Ku Klux Klan, basically, you want to be a bigot, but you can't wear a mask. You can't hide your identity, because the doctors, the lawyers, the pharmacists, the salespeople during the day were mentioned, and at night covered their heads and lynched and killed and burned. Once that mask was removed from the bigots, the Ku Klux Klan went into a major, major decline. Now, comes 50 years later, the internet, and it puts that mask back on the bigot. And today, bigots anonymously surf, it's a super highway for them. So the anti-Semitism, which had to be transmitted in print or fax or whatever, today in nanoseconds travels the globe. I remember growing up, Paul, when we were taught, how do you answer bad speech with good speech? But when bad speech comes in a tsunami, how do you deal with it? And so the new ingredient of making anti-Semitism broader, more worldwide, more spread, and legitimate, because truth is gone. So anything you see on the screen or on your phone, all of a sudden has an element of legitimacy of truth that it didn't have before. And that inspires people to act. And we know that it starts with words, but it doesn't end with words.
Right. And you mentioned, obviously, the American constitutional defense of freedom of expression, and also that America just has this extremely ingrained culture of free speech. But where do you stand on the question of whether there can or should be controls over what is said on social media, on Twitter? Would you be in favor of Congress passing laws to control what is said on the internet?
Well, it's a very broad question. I remember after 9/11, America struggled with a different balance. How do we balance our security and freedom of speech, if you will? And we had the Patriot Act, so we balanced it. We found a balance. It's not perfect. The challenge you're asking about today is, the answer is, yeah, I don't know what kind of regulation. We need to find a balance between civility and freedom of speech, because the social media and the internet has already destroyed privacy in our society. There is no more privacy. It's on its way to destroy civility. And before it destroys civility, we need to find that balance. Now, the balance may be regulations, maybe legislation, I don't know. We have just about begun the discussion. We're not aware. It has changed the way we talk to each other. It has changed the way children socialize, the way they're dating, everything. Forget about COVID. COVID was just another bomb. But the internet changed the way we talk or not talk to each other, certainly on civility. So yes, we need to address it, whether it's legislation, whether it's regulation, whether it's taking away monopolies. I don't know the answer, but I do know we need to take it seriously.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned the political football, the political football that we tend to be in these situations, and it seems to me that, again, looking at it from Israel and as an Israeli, one of the most shocking developments in American anti-Semitism was what we saw happening in the United States during the Gaza conflict, the recent Gaza conflict, because certainly I'm not used to seeing that in the United States. I mean, in Europe, yes, those sorts of anti-Israel demonstrations which contain blatantly anti-Semitic slogans and placards and expressions, but to me that was a new thing in the United States. Am I right that that's new, or have I just not noticed it before?
No, you're right. I think we were smug about it because the last, Gaza war, 2014, we saw it in Europe. We saw attacks on Jews, Quad Jews. We saw attacks on synagogues and Jewish institutions, because if you were Jewish, you were Zionist, you were Israel, you were responsible, etc. And we smugly said, yeah, that's Europe, because in Europe there is political violence, but not here. Well, you know what? It took 7 years. It's here. So it was a shock. It was a shock. I called it a pogrom. Jews were singled out in the streets of New York, of Los Angeles, and Salt Lake City. If you weren't sure somebody was, they asked them, "Are you Jewish?" and then they attacked them. And ironically, or not ironically, the perpetrators were the same perpetrators as they were in Europe, primarily pro-Palestinian, mostly Muslim. Yes, they were supported by leftists, but it's the same scenario. And again, I would say the internet carries it all. It's all out there. If it's good in Paris, why can't it be good in New York for the bigots who hate Israel and hate Jews? Yeah, and I hope it's a wake-up call for American Jews. I hope it's a wake-up call to say we're not immune. I think Pittsburgh was a wake-up call that we're not immune. But also, somehow we thought we are different and we're not as politically violent a country, than the Europeans. But I think we woke up to see, no, it's not that different. And we need to be aware. We need to take security seriously. European Jews have taken it seriously in the last 20, 25 years. And again, I say from the platform, the ADL, we've been saying it all these years. As long as you don't have a vaccine against it, as long as you don't have an antidote, you have to protect yourself. Yes, law enforcement will be there. And yes, law enforcement is our friend. But at the end of the day, we have to worry about our security. And then to be able to continue to be proud Jews, which is the other cost of all of this. To me, after I mourn the loss of Jewish life, I mourn the fact that Jews are saying to me or to the public that they will become less Jewish, that they won't wear a Star of David, they won't send their kids to Jewish schools. That's a victory, a posthumous victory for Hitler, which we can't afford. So first we need security, then we need to build pride, and then not to give them the victory of Jews not being Jews because of fear of anti-Semitism and violence.
Okay, right, yeah, that's a really powerful statement, I think. Abe, you've, over the years that you were leading the ADL, and also since you left, you've never been afraid to challenge those in power speak truth to power, as it were, regardless of who's in Congress or who's in the White House. I don't know how well you know President Biden, but if you could have his ear, is there something that you would recommend to him that he could say or do which could make a difference?
Well, we need to understand Joe Biden is not Donald Trump, but nor is he Obama. He is Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, in terms of the last 40 years of his history with the Jewish people, has been one of closeness, understanding, sensitivity. That doesn't mean we won't have differences, because the differences are not about Joe Biden. The differences are what Joe Biden or Americans perceive to be their interests. And their interests may not necessarily always meet our interests. But yeah, if I were to speak to him today, I would say to him, the next anti-Semitic act that happens in the US, don't wait 48 hours, because that's very, very important. It is very important that the message come from the bully pulpit. He and the President of the United States he said all the right things, but it takes time. And I know, knowing him personally, I know the Kishka. I know how he feels about Jews. I know how he feels about the Holocaust. And plus everything else, he's a man of empathy. But there are always balances. So I would hope that the next time, God forbid, there is an anti-Semitic manifestation, immediately there is a response. The administration did respond in all voices, but the most important voice is still the President of the United States, because he is the biggest bully pulpit we have, and probably even globally. Because one of the ways to combat anti-Semitism is to make sure that people aren't silent, that people aren't intimidated. What's happening today is a little bit scarier. Jews are being isolated. Jews are being made pariahs. We saw what is really a silly incident, if you will, in the context of global events. There was a food fair in Philadelphia last month. And the food fair invited Italian food, Spanish food, Mexican food, and along with it was Jewish Israeli food. And there was a truck called Moshava. And I don't think more than 3 people called the organizers and said, "How dare you have an Israeli food truck?" And the organizers canceled it's called Moshava. And the outcry was such that they canceled the whole fair. But the scary part of that is, now the people who organized it, they weren't bigots, they weren't anti-Israel, but they were intimidated by one call to say, if you have an Israeli, you're anti-Palestinian. And that isolated the Jewish-Israeli part. You have situations now in universities that are not anti-Israel, who will not invite Israeli generals or speakers, not because they don't like Israel, but because they've been intimidated that if they do, there'll be unrest, there'll be noise, there'll be demonstrations. And that's very, very dangerous, because that makes not only Israel the pariah, but those who stand with Israel as a pariah. And certainly in the United States, where Israel needs the United States. Part of the cement of American support is the American Jewish community. And if the American Jewish community gets intimidated for not standing up to defend Israel, and it was to some extent paralyzed in this last Gaza war. They weren't the demonstrations. All right, you can explain it, COVID, no COVID, but it wasn't. The outcry was not there the same way I saw it in 2014. And to me, that's, I don't worry about BDS. BDS hasn't really changed anybody's relationship to Israel, except made some political noise. But if this movement succeeds in isolating the Jews, in making them a pariah, that's very, very, very serious. And we need to be aware, and we need to stand up, and we need to challenge. Last week, somebody was fired from an educational institution because she issued a statement condemning anti-Semitism, and she didn't condemn anti-Palestinian. You know what? Palestinians weren't beaten up in the streets of New York and LA. So yeah, there is a bigger problem. There is a bigger problem, which we need to be aware of, stand up immediately and not permit it to fester or just hope that it's going to go away.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll ask one last question. It's sort of two questions in one, really. And it really refers to what you've been talking about with the politics right now in America. The first question relates to the American right, the conservative side of the map, and you were among those that were critical of President Trump for essentially acting in ways which emboldened or empowered the far right in America. Is that now that Trump is now out of the picture, or at least for now? I mean, at least not in the White House, maybe not out of the picture. Do you think that post-Trump, that side of the American right, that more populist side of the American right will die down? That's part one, and part two relates to the left and liberals. And I can't help noticing that often the condemnations of anti-Semitism by liberals or progressives always have to include a long list of other people that, like anti-Semitism, there's an anti-Semitic incident. So then they'll say, and we condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and homophobia and transphobia and this long list of prejudices. And it seems to be beyond their capacity to just unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism. Can you comment on both of those things?
Okay, so let me do the first part. What succeeded for us in all these years is knowing that there is no vaccine. We built up what we call a containment policy, a firewall around anti-Semitism, which was a conglomerate of a lot of things. Yes, legislation, litigation, shaming, the media, coalitions, taboos. So there was this environment, sort of a civil contract of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable when it came to Jews. It worked for us, but in the last couple of years, it dissipated and the firewall is gone. Part of it is the political atmosphere, both on the right and on the left. So I'll deal first on the right. The Charlottesville 200 that marched, proudly with torches, Jews will not replace us, were not created by Donald Trump or Trumpism. They were there. They were part of the anti-Semitic landscape of our country. It's there. But they knew enough not to surface. Maybe they'll lose a job, maybe their kids will lose friends, whatever. There were consequences, unspelled consequences. Trumpism destroyed all taboos. When Donald Trump talked about minorities in the way that he talked, whether they were Muslims or Hispanics, or even talked about Jews in stereotypic terms, he destroyed all their taboos. And the Charlottesville 200 felt legitimized, had the chutzpah, because they figured now they can show their face, they can spout their venom, and it'll be okay. So that's out there, not only about us, but everywhere else. So the genie is out of the bottle. I would put it also, hatred and anti-Semitism were in the sewers, and we were able to keep the sewer covers on. The sewer covers are off, and now it's all percolating out. The question is, how do we get it back? We have to rebuild containment. We have to rebuild firewalls. We need to rebuild coalitions. It's very difficult because the politicization is the right won't talk to the left won't talk to the right. So yeah, I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist. I think we will be able to rebuild it. Listen, when you talk about Israel, I said a long time ago, people said, wow, how can you deal with the Israelis love Trump and the American Jews don't love Trump? And I always said, where you stand depends where you sit. Where Israelis sat, Trump was great. Where American Jews sat, Trump was bad. But we learned to deal with it. But at the end of the day, we also knew we're paying a price, because American support of Israel, as long as it was bipartisan, served us well. I'm more worried about destroying that than any other thing. So listen, there was a time when the ADL took congressmen to Israel. We took Republican and Democratic congressmen together. They bonded. Democrats and Republicans bonded in Israel. They bonded on in the Holy Land, etc. Today, Democrats go separately, Republicans go separately to Israel. What a lost opportunity. So yeah, we have to rebuild. Now the left is another problem. We have a problem with them as well. Part of the problem, by the way, is the embrace of Trump. Trump embraced Israel as one thing, but Israel embraced Trump. So we're paying a political price for that. But there's intimidation in the left. We're talking about progressive. It's the extreme left that intimidates the center. And so good people who are ready to stand up for Israel are being forced. No, you can't stand up for Jews without standing up for everybody else, or you can't stand up for Israel unless you embrace the Palestinians. Well, it's not exactly the same thing, and it hasn't been. So it's a very serious problem, which we need to confront, we need to challenge, and not let him get away with it. That is, to condemn anti-Semitism during the last attacks has nothing to do with anybody else's. Chinese Americans, there are all kinds of issues, but we need to strengthen their ability to stand up with the facts. And the facts were Jews were being attacked in the streets of New York, and so were Chinese Americans. Okay, but it's not the same. And you condemn this and you condemn that, and it's not a soup. It's not a soup. It's tough. It's going to be tough because we continue to be politicized. We continue to be polarized. And as long as that continues, listen, I've said we're the mother of all prejudices, okay? We serve everybody's prejudice needs, and that continues here as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Abe. Okay, I'm going to go to audience questions. We've already got a fair bunch here. So Dan asks, he wants to know about what you think about the what he calls the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism by elected officials. And he's referring, I think, specifically to elected officials on the left, like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and AOC, the so-called squad. And he also asks, I guess, in relation to that, can one be anti-Israel and not anti-Semitic?
All right, let me start with the second one. I personally, I don't. If you use the word anti, the answer is no. That means you can be critical of Israel and not be an anti-Semite. But if you put it, can you be anti-Israel? The answer is no, unless you're anti-Palestinian state, you're anti-French nationalism, you're anti-American. If you're a universalist, God bless you, and you have no impact whatsoever. But if the only state, the only aspiration for independence that you're opposed to is Israel or Zionism, you're an anti-Semite. That's easy to me. And I've challenged journalists throughout the years. Sure, you don't like what this Israeli government did? Fine. You don't like that? Have you asked the Chinese? Have you asked the Saudis? Have you asked the Cubans? And if the answer is no, is nonsense. You don't really care about the issue or the values. All you care about is criticizing Israel, and whammo, you're an anti-Semite. Now, when you're talking about normalizing anti-Semitism, by the way, it's not only on the left, it's on the right too. When you have whatever her name, Taylor.
Oh yeah.
So it exists on both. I would say to you this, to Dan, don't make them bigger than they are. The squad are 4, okay? Let's not make them big. We're making them bigger. The Democratic Party is made up more than 4. We have lived, by the way, I remember living with the Republican Party, which was anti-Israel. Okay, I remember Senator Percy. I remember Pat Buchanan. They were not tzaddikim. They didn't love Israel. They didn't love Jews. You know what? We lived with it. We survived it, etc. We didn't make them martyrs. We didn't make them bigger than they are. There have always been 50, 60, 70 congressmen in the Democratic Party who were soft on Israel. That's with J Street, with whatever. But don't make them bigger than they are. You have a president of the United States today that I don't care whether you're left or right. During the last conflict with Gaza, he acted the best way. We gave Israel the time. We gave Israel the political support. They're giving it the arms. Okay, so the squad yelled, screamed, gesundheit hate. We make them bigger. We give them credibility. We should not permit them to mainstream anti-Semitism. But when you make them, all of a sudden they're on TV more than they should be. Why? Because we continue to, I'm not saying ignore them, but I say your piece, move on. Don't obsess about them when you have a president in the White House like Biden who acted the way he acted, okay, in the last conflict. If you take a look at how many Israeli visitors and whom they saw in the last 2 weeks on issues of Israel's security, on dialogue on Iran, the squad is garnished, and let's not make them more than they are. The other thing we should be doing is embrace your friends. Embrace your friends. They need to know that we care, that we appreciate, that we value. And when they will be challenged, they need to know that we will be there. That's a lot more important than getting our jollies off about AOC or whatever her name is.
Thank you. So there's a question here from Jeff. Jeff says that in early 2017, post-Charlottesville, he attended a Knesset hearing on the growth of anti-Semitism in the United States, and the ADL Israel's director submitted an extensive report and gave testimony. And he says that apart from a 2-sentence token acknowledgement of extreme left and Islamic sources of anti-Semitism, she focused totally on white supremacist and extreme right anti-Semitism. And he wants to know whether you're concerned by what he calls the seeming reluctance of American Jewish organizations to address anti-Semitism from the left and Islamist sources, and indeed the alliance between the left and Islamists.
There are all kinds of positions of organizations. I'm not commenting about the ADL. That's above my pay grade. You can ask me about what I did at the ADL. I knew where the issues were, and I so stated. I'm not a maven or a critic on the ADL today. That you need to ask and challenge anybody else. To be very fair, you attended a session. I don't know what the session was. I don't know what the questions were. I don't know what was in the other pages. And with all due respect, Jeff, I don't know whether it was 2 sentences or 2 paragraphs or what. So that doesn't go anywhere except trying to whatever. Yeah, I am concerned about the American Jewish community. I am concerned that the American Jewish community feels intimidated. I am concerned, not that ADL or AJC or whatever. I found silence. I found deafening silence. I did not see American Jews stand up and shriek, Chai v'kayim, hey, listen, Israel is being attacked. Israel is being attacked. Yeah, all other issues. I didn't see it. And I'm not ready to say it's political, but I am saying to you, there is intimidation. There is intimidation. And after Pittsburgh and Poway and Jews are afraid to stand up as Jews. That's the issue. That's the issue. We know where the American Jewish community is politically. It's 75-25. For all kinds of good reasons, in the same way as I said, Israel 75-25 with Trump. Okay, it makes sense, but I think that the lack of response is more fear and intimidation of their position, of their safety, of their status, than it is how political they are. And that to me is a lot more dangerous and sinister than whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Thank
you very much. There's a question here which actually relates to, I think, to something you just said about your concern at Jewish silence, the Jewish community's silence. Judy is an Israeli originally from Cincinnati, who's been here for 50 years. And she wonders why American Jews have not found a slogan similar to Black Lives Matter, because she thinks that she's concerned that American Jews are becoming like the fearful, politically timid African Americans of the 1940s or 50s.
Well, that's an overstatement. Okay. There was thought of making Jews' Lives Matter, and it was corny, and it wouldn't go anywhere. I saw something actually last night on television, which says to be maybe returning the corner. And I saw ads in Times Square by an organization called Jew Belong. And I said, wow, smart, creative, out of the box. Huge ads in Times Square, raising some of the questions you're asking.
Yeah, I saw that.
And also, before we called the American Jews the Jews of silence, okay, there was silence. We should be concerned. I think if you went on Google and you search, there are more anti-Semitism organizations today in the United States than there have ever been. It's a booming business. There were three: the American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, and the ADL. That was it. We fought anti-Semitism. Okay. Today, I would venture to say there are 100, 200. They're on websites. They're all over the place. So we're not Jews of silence, but that doesn't mean we're not intimidated. So yeah, there are voices, but a lot of voices that are out there nobody listens to because they are so political and so politicized that they're dismissed. And we all dismiss people saying, "Oh, that's because he supports so and so." So we need the center to speak out, and the center is gone in many things. It's gone politically, and it's also, it's also missing in the Jewish community. So yeah, I don't think we're Jews of silence. I think we've had a moment. And talking to an Israeli audience, I'm very careful about. I don't think the Israeli public realized the threat of the last war. I really don't. I watch Israeli television religiously all the time. And I don't think that there was a real threat. God forbid if Hezbollah opened up, I don't know, there are enough Iron Domes in the world, so I think Israelis too didn't take it as seriously. And when you don't take it seriously, we certainly don't take it as seriously, although sometimes we see the threat to you much in a more sharper sense than you do because you live it. You live it every day. So the answer is, I hope we have learned. I hope we have learned we can't afford to be silent. We can't afford to be silent. And we also need to be able to honestly say, we stand up for you, you stand up for us. We don't demand that when we stand up for you, you have to add everybody else on it. We have to be more honest, more direct, and hopefully it will be successful.
Yeah, I think that maybe the Israeli mentality that you're referring to is the famous "Yeh Beseder" attitude. We've talked about anti-Semitism from the left and the right. I want to go to a couple of questions which refer to two groups, two populations that we haven't really mentioned. One is African Americans, and there's a question specifically about the influence, your assessment of the influence of Louis Farrakhan's movement, Nation of Islam, on African Americans today. And the second point is about American Muslims, whether there is a significant threat of anti-Semitism for American Muslims in the way that unfortunately there is from some Muslim populations in Europe.
Okay, so first let's deal with the African American community. Listen, probably the greatest voice against anti-Semitism and support of Israel was Martin Luther King. I also remember, I'm old enough to remember the voice of Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was an early civil rights African-American leader who started an organization, Basic Black Americans in Support of Israel. So I remember those days. Now, since those days, the African-American community suffered a lack of leadership. And what rose was Louis Farrakhan. And again, you look at the history where the ADL, and I've always said Louis Farrakhan is the most dangerous anti-Semite, not only in the African-American community, but beyond. Because unlike David Duke, David Duke was a rabid anti-Semite, but with not a serious following. Louis Farrakhan had a following, and worse than a following, decent African Americans were intimidated and would not speak out. And that, to me, again, as I'm saying now, is the problem, whether Jews are intimidated. But if decent people don't stand up, I don't compare, to me, the Shoah and the Holocaust is unique, and it's very dangerous to compare. But one of the things that, happened in Nazi Germany is the lack of there are a lot of decent people who didn't stand up. And Farrakhan is an anti-Semite, is a bigot, is a black racist, is a misogynist, is all these things. And yet the voices within the African-American community to stand up aren't there, because he intimidates them to that extent. I was offered several dialogues with him, which I refused. So yeah, it is serious. There is also a very psychological, if you will, issue in the African-American community. I believe African-Americans believe that we took away their Bechorah, that is like Esav and Yaakov, that African-Americans, they legitimately believe that they were victimized in America. And my God, were they victimized. To this day, they're being victimized. But somehow they feel that Jews took away their victimhood, that we took away things that they should have gotten, so that our success was not based on what we achieved, but what we were given. And that's a problem. Farrakhan plays on that. And that's part of the jealousy. It's part of the problems when the two communities came together in Crown Heights, in Jersey City. It becomes an economic issue that Jews are coming into their communities. And so it's much deeper. And on the issues, on the economic issues, African-American anti-Semitism has a base which goes beyond the ideology. And now, Muslim Americans, listen, there's another issue we haven't mentioned. That's Hispanic Americans. In the polls that we did when I was at the ADL, there's a serious problem in Hispanic anti-Semitism. We found that, now I'm talking now 6-8 years ago, so I don't know if there are any polls taken, but that 40% of the Latino community was infected with classic anti-Semitism. The good news was that American-born Hispanics, it went down to 20, but it's serious. And if you want to look towards the future, within 20 years, the Latino American community will control Congress, and they will decide how much money goes to Costa Rica or Israel and what are state church issues. So if we were smart, we would engage that community very seriously and almost in a Marshall Plan approach, because a lot of our grandchildren's future will depend on that relationship. Muslims, look, Muslim Americans come to America, want to live, but they're like in every group, some of them are being radicalized. So you have a jihadist element. Anti-Semitism is very high there, in the same way that it's high in Europe. The level of anti-Semitism has grown in recent years in Europe by the influx. ADL did a survey of 100 countries on anti-Semitism 6-7 years ago. And the level of anti-Semitism in Arab and North African countries was 70 and 80%. That's a human conveyor belt. When these people come to France or England or Germany, they bring that anti-Semitism in the same way that Hispanics brought it from Mexico, because in Mexico, the Jews are still responsible for healing Christ. The Vatican didn't filter down. So yeah, it's there. They are radicalized in the United States as well. And, but again, electing members to Congress. I think in the next 4 years, you'll see Israeli Americans elected to Congress. That's what America is all about. And we have to be alert. We have to be active. We need to understand, keep it in perspective, and be smart about it.
It's the Hispanic point, which I hadn't thought of, is actually very interesting also, because it exemplifies the extent to which anti-Semitism, as you said, has all these different forms, and even the sort of the oldest form that most of us have forgotten about, the old deicide charge, is still there from people from Catholic countries.
Yeah, the most significant change in anti-Semitism in our lifetime was the reversal of the Catholic Church. There's no question. However, the problem with it is it has not filtered down to the parish. The last survey that I did with the ADL still found 30% of the American people believing we killed Christ. So this is after Vatican II. Yeah. It's very deep in Western culture. So whereas Christianity no longer is an existentialist threat to us, radical Islam has become the existentialist threat because it threatens Israel. If it threatens Israel, it threatens the Jewish people. But we haven't removed the antecedents of that anti-Semitic canard, which is very, very deep, because they still go to church, they still believe, and therefore it's still there. It's still there.
Okay, there's a couple of responses to things that you've said in the answers that you've just given. Michael wants to know why you decided not to debate Farrakhan. He said, Michael suggests that it could have been an opportunity for you to sort of take him on.
Well, the actual truth is he backed out. The Chicago Defender, which is an African-American newspaper, I met with the board, and the board said, we can set him up. And then, he just at that moment said no. There was another effort, but it was done by somebody who I did not trust. And you know what? At the end of the day, if you think I'm smart and he's stupid, he's not stupid. And he talks to his people of color, and I'm a white Zionist. So there is this, this gaiva, or maybe I would have, but maybe I wouldn't have. And at the end of the day, he speaks to his people in a way, who am I speaking to? I'm not convincing the Jews. I'm trying to convince him and his followers. And I'm not sure it's so smart, because he can say things which I can't say, all right? Because he has no bounds. And I was head of an organization. I had certain boundaries. I had a certain image. I had civility. He doesn't have it. So this idea of debating a bigot sometimes backfires. So I'm glad I did.
That's an interesting, that's an interesting take on that, because I think there's always this assumption, right, that, as you said, the answer to bad speech is good speech, so we should always take these people on, but maybe we should be more circumspect.
Many years ago, Michael Jackson did a recording, Jew them, sue them, etc. And I called it anti-Semitic, and his agent wanted him to stand on a platform with me to sort of apologize. And I remember my children said to me, Dad, don't do it. And I said, why not? They said, because it will be your 15 minutes of fame, but after that, you will be known to having sat on the platform with Michael Jackson. And all your years of developing a reputation to fight prejudice will go down the tubes with that one. So sometimes, what looks like smart isn't always smart.
Okay. Just a follow up to that. Judith Schwartz makes the point that Deborah Lipstadt has said that she wouldn't debate Holocaust deniers, for example. I think it's maybe a similar point.
Yes. Because you also give them credibility, you give them legitimacy, which they don't deserve.
Right.
And, there is reason and rationale for that approach.
So Judy, who asked the question about Black Lives Matter and having a slogan, says that, and I think this is maybe my fault for phrasing her question in a certain way, but she said that what she didn't necessarily mean that a slogan like Jewish Lives Matter or something that was kitschy or clever, but a slogan which she says that appeals to Jews and also speaks to the liberal spirit of Americans.
Okay, Judy, I'll give you. Paul has my email. Come up with what I'll promote it.
Okay, there you go. The challenge is there for you, Judy. Judith Schwartz asks about, going back to the Hispanic point, that there's this Hispanic congressman, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres, who's very strongly pro-Israel. Probably the most, I think, the most openly pro-Israel, at least vocally pro-Israel of the new intake of congressmen, certainly on the Democratic side. And she says, how do you mobilize him to decrease anti-Semitism in the Hispanic community?
Well, you again, we love to overdo things. Leave him alone. You know, he's got a job. He represents his community. Okay. They're going to measure him by how much he does for them, not for us. So we sometimes take non-Jewish friends and we so make them Jewish that they lose their impact in their own community. So I would say, you know, let him, don't overdo it. He's got a job to do. Don't make him our Shabbos guy. You want to help him, make sure that he's not challenged by somebody who makes this an issue to defeat him, which is the progressive left, which will take this as an issue. That's what we need to do. He needs to know that when the time comes, and by the way, he's already running for re-election. So every 2 years, the moment they get elected, they start running for re-election. The way we can help him and for him to help us is to make sure that he doesn't get defeated, because he will be targeted. He will be definitely targeted, and that's the not to have him recruit others, but to make sure that he stands there and survives, and that the message goes out. If you stand up as a friend of Israel, it's good, not bad.
Okay, I want to ask. There's a question which groups together a few questions that I've had about which it really speaks to the question of how serious is the problem in the United States, because on the one hand, obviously there are people, not Jews, really, but other people who are downplaying it, or even saying that the Jews are making a big fuss about nothing or whatever. But on the other hand, some might say, and maybe you're one of them, that we shouldn't go too far on this. There was apparently, and I didn't see this, but one of our audience here says that there was an Israeli American who said recently that the political language the language coming from elected representatives about Israel reminds him of Germany in the 1930s. So how serious is the problem? Also, maybe as someone originally from the UK, added to that, do you think that there's a problem akin to what happened to the British Labour Party and the British left with the takeover by Jeremy Corbyn?
Okay, I think it is serious, but it is not a crisis. Okay, serious. That means you can't ignore it. You can't say it's not there. You can't say, but don't make it a crisis. Just like we're not Jews of silence. The Soviet Jews were Jews of silence, and even they weren't Jews of silence. The catastrophe, my heart getting in the streets, okay? But there is a problem, and we should see it seriously. We should evaluate it, and we should be smart in terms of our response. I think as a Shoah survivor, I'm very disturbed about the abuse of analogies to the Shoah. Elie Wiesel once said to me that Holocaust trivialization is a lot more serious than Holocaust denial. Trivialization, and we've been trivializing it. And you in Israel, in your political forum, have been more guilty than anybody else in the last couple of years. If Israeli police are Nazis, it's okay. So, and that legitimizes when Jews and Israelis compare things to Hitler and Nazism, that gives it credibility because we were the victims. So, somebody who wasn't, how dare he? But if we say it, so somebody who compares what's going on now to Germany, to Nazism, etc., either doesn't understand what it was all about, or is abusing it. Having said that, I'll give you an enigma. In all the years, having been a Shoah survivor and studying the Shoah and all my life, I really, really did not understand how Hitler got the power, really. And in the last couple of years of the internet and politicizing lies and taking away truth, and I'm talking about America. You know what? There is no truth in America. When you try to destroy the judiciary and try to destroy the media, hey, that's what Hitler did. Okay, so while I don't compare it, God forbid, I understand a lot better how it can happen. But having said that, I would still not compare, and because it undermines what it was all about, and it distorts history. Can what happened in Britain happen here? Sure, you know. That I go back to my book, Never Again ? I don't think any Holocaust survivor will say to you, never again is a promise. It's not. It's a hope. It's a wish. It's an aspiration. It can happen. It can happen. You know, and the world is such that we see it happening. When you destroy truth, and, you know, I know people in Israel are all upset. Trump destroyed truth. Truth is the biggest weapon we have against the lie of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a lie. Bigotry is a lie. If you destroy truth, you've destroyed the one vehicle you have to fight anti-Semitism. So yeah, he did that, okay? Regardless how wonderful he was to Israel. But so, yeah, it can happen. It can happen because look what happened on January 6th in the United States. My God. And you have people in Congress saying it didn't happen. It was nothing. It was done by Democrats. So yeah, what happened in Britain absolutely can happen in the United States. I hope that we'll stand up. But to this day, you know, there are serious people saying the election was stolen here. There are serious people in Israel who are saying the election was stolen in Israel. It frightens the bejeebus out of me. And I know I'm getting political. I survived in Poland. When Yair Netanyahu does a tweet attacking the Israeli government for challenging the Polish government for wiping out any chance for restitution, I say, Gewalt. What is happening to us, to the Jewish people? And where is his father to shut him up? Because that impacts on my parents and my grandparents and all those who suffered in Poland. So yeah, Paul, I'm sorry, it can happen, and it can happen anywhere.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the heartfelt nature of that answer. So I think we'll do one last question. We're around the hour mark. There's a question here about the anti-Israel activism, anti-Zionism, if you like, from Jews. From Sherry asked about what she calls young, hip, educated Jews who fight against Israel as Jews. Could you comment on that? And she also wants to know whether you think that the problem of assimilation in America dovetails with the problem of this anti-Zionism from Jews.
Well, the problem is it's ours. I mean, we fail to educate our children. I'm excluded. I educated my children. It doesn't guarantee they went to yeshiva, they went to Israel. Doesn't guarantee that they're going to be there, but chances are they will be, and they are. But the reason you're seeing what you're seeing is we failed several generations of not educating them about Jewish history, about the Shoah, about Israel. We were so busy being successful or busy being assimilated, whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Part of assimilation is hiding who you are and what you are. But yeah, we lost several generations. I will say also at the same time, having said that, there's still miracles going on. There are more when I grew up on the college campus in the 60s, there was no picnic being pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. You had SNCC and CORE, you had the Palestinian students, you had the left active, you had the anti-war movement. It was no great mitzvah. And it was the same 25 college campuses who were anti-Israel today that were anti-Israel now. But all you had then was a SZO, Student Zionist Organization, and Hillel. Today, on the college campus, you have a consortium of Jewish organizations who support Israel, love Israel, argue with Israel, question Israel. You have tens of thousands of Jewish kids who went to Israel, who experienced Israel. Now, they may not be happy with Bibi or they may not be happy with Bennett. That's fine. That's okay with me because they care enough. They care enough to know and to question. I worry more about total ignorance and total apathy. So we have more of interest. We have more of concern. Again, there are more kids involved in wanting Israel to be the best. God bless them, okay? That's fine. The other part comes out of total ignorance. They weren't taught what being Jewish means. They weren't taught what not Jewish Zionism, what Zionism is. So we failed. We missed a generation. So it's easy to blame them, but we should blame ourselves.
Okay. Well, Abe Foxman, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. And I think over so many years, you've been an example to people, not just in America, but also, and I'll speak a little personally here, but around the world for people who are involved in tackling anti-Semitism in various forums over the years. And your books and your writings and your example have been a go-to for many of us. So it's been a real pleasure to speak to you and to have you with us today. Thank you so much. I think everyone learned a lot from what you had to say. To everyone on this meeting, I hope it was as enlightening and informative for you as it was for me. Please join me next week. I'll be joined next week by Professor Gil Troy. And if you're not on my mailing list, you can join it by emailing me at paulg@begincenter.org.il. So do that, and you'll get information in advance of all these events. You can also find out information on the Begin Center English website and Facebook page. And I wish you all a good evening or a good day, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.